Welcome to another edition of the Bird Calls. I'm David Grubb. The New Orleans Pelicans are back in the news, but it's not for off-the-court drama. It's about a potential franchise-changing trade. On Monday, Shams Charania reported that the Pelicans are aggressively pursuing either the number 2 or the number 3 pick in this month's NBA draft in order to pursue guard Scoot Henderson. If you're unaware of Scoot Henderson, he's the youngest player ever to join the G League when he joined the Ignite at age 17. He went on and scored 31 points in his second ever professional game. At 6'2" with a 6'9" wingspan, he's considered the best point guard prospect in this draft. In another year, he definitely would be the number 1 overall pick. He's got great skills on both sides of the basketball, an excellent penetrator and shot creator who can finish at the rim very athletically. He has an effective pull-up jumper. He struggled to shoot it from deep last season, making less than 28% of his three-pointers. But most scouts believe that he can become a very good shooter with time. He's been compared to Russell Westbrook and Donovan Mitchell, among others. Well, making a move like that would be a signal that the Pelicans don't like something significant about what's in their current mix, because the cost to move up in this draft would not be cheap. The Charlotte Hornets, of course, hold the 2nd pick, and the Portland Trail Blazers have the 3rd. In a moment, I'll be joined by Highkin. Sean writes for the Rose Garden Report, which covers the Trailblazers. I'll ask him about the possibility and the probability of a deal between the Pels and Portland and what that deal could cost. Looking at this from Charlotte's perspective, at number 2, they hold all the cards. Victor Wembanyama is going first to San Antonio. Then there are 2, maybe 3 other candidates for the 2nd pick. Besides Henderson, you have Brandon Miller out of Alabama. And even forward Amin Thompson has been mentioned in the top 3. So, reportedly, the Hornets really like the thought of pairing Brandon Miller with LaMelo Ball. You get your athletic wingman who can do just about everything to pair with Melo. He hasn't really had a true wing complement in Charlotte. Gordon Hayward has always been injured. Miller has obvious star potential, but that isn't a lock. We know that before the draft, fake outs, smoke screens, outright lies, that's what teams do. If you're David Griffin, though, and you want to make a straight-up deal with either team, you have to be hoping that Charlotte is in love with Miller, because otherwise you'd have to imagine that any trade with the Hornets is going to mean the loss of either Brandon Ingram or Trey Murphy III. Look, Zion Williamson, of course, is your franchise centerpiece, but he's not on the court. And his injury history and his long-term max deal don't make him as appealing necessarily as Ingram, who, like Williamson, is also from North Carolina. He has a better recent injury history, and he's shown that he can be really capable as a second option in the league without having a true point guard around him to make his life easier. So Murphy, he looks like he's coming into his own as a future star in this league, and he's the Pelicans' lone elite shooter. He can play at either the 3 or the 4 spots, and he's a tremendous athlete in transition. You think Melo would want to have somebody like that around? Of course. Everyone wants to have someone like Trey Murphy III around. So the question then moves to Portland. What would it take? If the Trailblazers are truly interested in retaining Damian Lillard and rebuilding around him, does Scoot Henderson make them competitive now? Probably not. Well, here's what Highkin had to say. I am joined by Highkin of the Rose Garden Report, and the Pelicans have been tied to the Trailblazers in potentially making a deal for the number 3 pick in the draft. Sean, first and foremost, how anxious are Portland fans about potentially dealing a top 3 pick?
I mean, it's kind of an interesting position that they're in, and I think a lot of it is going to depend on what happens at number 2, because the only thing about this draft that is 100% locked in is what San Antonio is doing at 1. There's all these, the rumor since the lottery has been that Charlotte might like Brandon Miller more than Scoot Henderson, and that might be the way that they go, but then, if Scoot Henderson is there, and most teams think he's the second best prospect in the draft behind Wembanyama, then either, Portland can get a lot for that pick, or, there are people who think, are you going to pass on a guy who could be that good? But if you draft another point guard, what does that mean for Dame? It's just a lot of stuff that's just kind of up in the air. And, I've heard conflicting things about obviously they want to move the, they would, if they get the right offer, they would like to, move the pick for more of a win now guy, because they do still want to keep building around Dame. He hasn't said he wants out. Like they aren't really interested in just trading him and rebuilding. That's not something they're thinking about doing. But also, they're not going to just trade the pick just to trade the pick. They have to get an offer that they feel like actually moves the needle towards contending in order to do that. So it's just there's just so much up in the air right now, and I just assume that anything that's out there is posturing from one side or another, from whoever it benefits for stuff to get out.
Yeah, because Charlotte, like you said, has the catbird seat. So number one is the lock.
Yeah.
You can easily make the case that Brandon Miller fits what they need, because they would love to have a wing forward to run the floor with, a LaMelo Ball to be able to score in transition. They struggled from the outside. Gordon Hayward has never really been able to be healthy for them. Miles Bridges, his situation dramatically changed their offense last year. And they've got a few small guards already on their roster. But again, they're talking about Scoot Henderson as if he's a guy confident enough to believe he should be the number one pick in this draft himself. Yeah. And do you pass on, like, it's that old story, like when they asked Bobby Knight, when Portland asked Bobby Knight, well, why would we draft Michael Jordan? We already have a two guard. We need a center. And they say, we'll play Michael Jordan at center. It's not the exact same thing.
No, I'm totally with you on the Charlotte thing. To me, Charlotte might have the worst base of talent in the league. So they can't, to me, they shouldn't be looking at LaMelo Ball as a reason not to draft Scoot Henderson, but I'm not the one running the team. And, they have different.
Who is?
That's another question, because I don't know if, Mitch Kupchak is the one calling the shots, or is Michael Jordan calling the shots? Because supposedly he was thinking about selling his shares, but I also heard there was a chance he might have just been waiting to see how the lottery shook out before he made a decision about that. But now that they moved up to 2, maybe he doesn't necessarily want to sell. Maybe he's the one running the show. I know that in the past, Steve Clifford, who was their coach, and then they fired him and then he brought him back. I remember in the 2017 draft, he was like screaming about, you guys need to draft Donovan Mitchell, and they didn't listen to him. So, since he's back there, maybe he has a say in it. So it's just, there's a lot of different, like, you don't know which guy each of these guys likes. And that's going to, and then, also if you're Charlotte, like, do you like any of the offers that you get for number 2? And, they're in a little bit of a different position than Portland is. So it's going to be real interesting to see how a lot of this plays out.
It absolutely is. Because, I look at Charlotte again, and, could they even be interested to switch that just to move down 1 with Portland? Is that, could that even be a potential deal to move back 1 and then move back more to gain more assets? Because I think that there's going to be this group of teams. I know Indiana's interested in moving up. I think that there are probably other teams that would like to move up, that if you're the right general manager, you play this like the NFL draft. Maybe I can get myself multiple first-round picks this year, and I can get myself picks in the future for a team that, maybe needs more pieces than just one guy in this draft can solve their problem.
Yeah, I could see that from Charlotte.
Yeah.
And, well, if they really want Brandon Miller, if that's the guy they like,
right,
and teams are, banging down their doors to, move up, and the guy that teams want to move up for is Scoot, I could see that being a situation where they leverage Portland, maybe get like a future pick from Portland to flip-flop spots so Portland can do whatever they do as far as trading for whichever one of these people want to move up to Scoot, and Charlotte gets like an asset and they still get to draft Miller if that's the guy they want. There's a lot about how this could play. I will tell you, I don't think Portland is really looking at this pick as if they're gonna move the pick. I don't get the sense, just talking to people in the organization and just kind of reading between the lines of like what their goals are, I don't think they would be interested in trading the pick for like more future picks or young play. Like, they are in the if they move the pick, they're in the business of getting a guy that they think is a needle mover that you can put next to Dame, and that's going to vault them into a different place in terms of, how they are in the playoff picture. That's more like, I've had people, like, ever since this report came out, I've had people ask me about, like, if they were going to do something with the Pelicans, for example, because that's what we're talking about, would it be like, Trey Murphy and like flip flop their picks and some future picks? I don't think that's something that they're interested in. I think there's, if anything is going to happen with Portland and New Orleans about the 3rd pick,
it has to be a star.
It has to be one of their 2 guys. And I think there's one of the 2 guys that they would be more interested in than the other.
And that's Brandon Ingram.
No,
I mean,
actually,
really?
no. I think Zion's the only way to do it.
You think that Zion would be of more interest to Portland, considering this is from the New Orleans perspective? I think New Orleans fans would rather Zion, quite frankly, be moved at this point because they're frustrated with him.
Which I understand.
Yeah. And they've seen BI. They know what Ingram is. And there's a lot of discomfort with Pelicans fans and potentially trading BI. But my thought is, again, if you're Portland, and you would know better than I, it would just be, I'm looking at Zion as a guy who's only played 29 games in the last 2 years. He has a max deal that just kicked in, and he's an undersized big that, if you said we got to have Ingram, who only has 3 years left on his deal, is only 22. Yeah, 2 years left on his deal, is only 25 years old. And, you're looking at it from a much different situation. He's a guy who's all-star adjacent right now. You know what I mean? Like him and some sweetener. Maybe it's Dyson Daniels. Maybe it's Kyra Lewis. Maybe it's Herb Jones or something like that. That Ingram his salary. Maybe it's the switch would be you come off of the Anthony Simons, who would make the salaries match. And then you give up Simons and you get Ingram in return and work it there.
I would tell you, just based on what it's a pretty limited sample size with this Portland front office as it exists right now, because Joe Cronin took over as GM in December of 21 after they fired Neil Olshey. So you basically had one draft, one free agency period, and 2 trade deadlines, one of which was, tearing the whole roster down while Dame had the core surgery, which was when they did the CJ McCollum trade with New Orleans. But just in that small sample size, I think what we've seen from just the way this front office operates and kind of the moves that they make and they don't make, they are big on taking swings and going after upside. Like, I'll give you an example, and this actually kind of traces back to New Orleans too. The 2 guys that they were torn between last year in the draft, they had the number 7 pick. The 2 guys that they were looking at that they were kind of decide down to as like the choice. One of them was Shaedon Sharpe, who they ended up taking. And the other one was Dyson Daniels, who New Orleans took 1 pick later at number 8. And the argument for Dyson Daniels was, he's more plug and play. He's ready to contribute and be a rotation player on a playoff team from day one. And the argument for Shaedon Sharpe was, he's going to take longer to get ready, but he has star upside. They ended up going with the star upside. And that's generally been how they approach things. I think the thinking with Zion would be, and I understand, what the concerns are, because if those concerns, and I'm not even talking about the stuff from this week. I don't really care about guys' personal lives or whatever. But just, I would need to see, if you're them, I would need to see the medicals and see if that's like halfway okay, and have to have some sort of conversation about, conditioning and, some of that kind of stuff. But if you feel like that stuff is even halfway workable, then I think that's the one where, every time Zion has been healthy, he's been arguably a top 5 player in the league and like an MVP level type of guy. And that's more, I feel like if you're going to trade the pick, like some of these, like there are some guys that I've seen, get thrown around as like possibilities for who, they could trade the pick for. And a lot of it is guys who have like maybe been an all-star a couple of times, like Zach LaVine or something, which I don't think they're really interested in.
No, I can't see that.
Or, and I kind of think they would put Brandon Ingram in that same category where like he is what he, like he's a good player. He's been an all-star a couple of times, but Brandon Ingram isn't really changing your life. Whereas Zion, if you're taking the bet that get him into a change of scenery, get him with different trainers, get the conditioning stuff under control, get him healthy. And then you put him and Dame together, and that's a title contender if that all breaks right. That's the swing. I mean, obviously the downside is much greater because he, it could go the way that it's gone with him the last few years with the injuries and stuff. But I think the upside from their standpoint, and just knowing what I know about how they look at this stuff, I think the upside is there to be worth it to trade a top 3 pick for that more than it would be for somebody like Ingram, where, he's a good player, but that's not like changing your world. I don't think.
Right, because I think we're in agreement there. If you were to ask me who's the only player on the Pelicans roster who could win 4 series for you. And that's what you're looking for.
And that's the whole
Zion
point.
Williamson.
And that's the whole point, like about, what Dame is talking about, like he wants them to do, he wants them to get, I don't know. And I don't know specifically how Dame views Brandon Ingram. I know he has very strong opinions about players he likes and players he doesn't. He watches more League Pass than anybody. He knows the league inside and out as far as different players. I know that there are guys that he likes and guys that he doesn't like. I don't know where Brandon Ingram is or isn't on that spectrum, but I think if they were to trade this pick for Brandon Ingram, again, he's a good player and, he would be a decent fit, I guess. But is that
enough?
Well, I'll put it this way. They were talking pretty seriously with Toronto last year at the draft about the 7th pick and trading it possibly for OG Anunoby. They decided not to do it because they thought the upside of keeping the pick and taking Shaedon Sharpe was higher. So that's kind of how they, even though OG is a guy that I think in the short term would have helped them now, but it's like, is OG Anunoby worth a top 10 pick in the draft? I think they decided no, and I think most people would agree no. Yeah. And I kind of would put, I know OG's never been an all-star and Brandon Ingram has been an all-star a couple times, but I would kind of put them in similar categories of player of he's he's not a bad guy to have, but he's not, he's not changing your world.
He's not the guy.
No, he's not. Whereas Zion, if he were to be able to stay healthy and get the conditioning stuff and whatever else figured out, which is a big if, because if that wasn't a big if, we wouldn't even be having this conversation because he'd be untouchable and the Pelicans would be a title contender. But I think that's more just knowing what I know about the Blazers front office and the way that they look at this stuff. I think that's the swing they would take with the 3rd pick, more so than something like Brandon Ingram that's more of a safe choice, but way lower of a ceiling.
If you're taking Zion on, then what other mitigating factors do you think that it would take for Portland? Because you'd want some level of insurance on your deal in that case, because you're giving up what many people view as a sure thing for a guy who is not anymore viewed as a sure thing.
Yeah, I don't know what else the deal would be. I'm sure they'd love to get back, one of those guys you mentioned, like a Herb Jones or a Dyson Daniels. I'm sure they'd love to get something like that back as well. I haven't gone through the full mechanics. The thing I'm interested in is because the salary, I almost wonder if it would have to be a 3-team deal, because the salary from Portland's end would probably be Simons and Nurkic. And I just don't, and Simons is a really good player who's on a really good contract, but New Orleans having CJ and presumably moving up to take Scoot, I don't know if Simons really makes a lot of sense.
And Nurkic on that certainly roster doesn't with Jonas.
No, or maybe the Pelicans take Nurkic and then they put reroute Jonas and Anthony Simons to a 3rd team, but then you have to get a 3rd team in, and that always makes this stuff complicated. I don't know how it would work, but I feel like I haven't had conversations with people in the Blazers front office about specifically what they would want from New Orleans since this report came out yesterday, because I just, I do check on stuff, but I also just assume that anything that GM is going to tell me right now is probably either they're lying to, boost leverage. You know how this kind of stuff works, whatever. So I haven't specifically checked on this with Portland, but just knowing what I know about the way that they operate, I think from their end with New Orleans, I think Zion is the only thing that would really move them.
And I think that means, to me, with the fact that this pick, there are multiple teams that are going to want this pick. And it's likely that, as you said, I think it would take a multiple team deal, more than just 2 teams involved, to make any type of deal work. If you're the Pelicans in particular, I think that this is one of those ones that, if it's going to happen, we don't hear about it till draft night, because it's going to take that much work in order to get a deal done. There's no straight up easy solution for either one of these teams where you just say, that's it, and we'll do it.
Well, the problem is, I think if it were the number 2, if they had the number 2 pick, it would be a lot easier, because we know San Antonio is taking Wembanyama at 1, so the draft really starts at 2. But we don't know what Charlotte is doing at 2. If they had the number 2 pick, if Portland had the number 2 pick, we know who the number 1 pick is going to be. There's going to be no drama there. So you can make deals now knowing who's going to be there at 2. But because it's 3 and there's so much uncertainty about what Charlotte is going to do, is Charlotte going to keep the pick? Are they going to take Miller? Maybe all this Miller stuff with them is a smokescreen and they actually just want Scoot and they're going to take Scoot. Maybe one of the teams that wants to trade up to get Scoot is going to, trade with Charlotte and not Portland. Like, there's so much variable. I've been saying since the night of the lottery, my assumption had been that Portland was going to trade the pick. But I have been saying the whole time that it's going to happen while they're on the clock, because you need to see what Charlotte does. And then, if Charlotte takes Miller, then maybe there are teams that wanted Scoot that then you go back to and say, hey, this is, you got this 5 minutes while we're on the clock to get your offers in. Or, maybe there are other teams that want Miller. And if he's the one on the board, maybe that's who, like, I've heard, for example, that Washington is a team that's really interested in Miller. In whatever capacity that is. I don't think they have anything workable with Portland. I don't think Bradley Beal is somebody that they're really interested in or something that's a fit. And I don't think they really have much else to trade. But that, for just to give you an example, just to let you know, there are other teams that highly value Brandon Miller, and the market for Portland's pick is not going to disappear if Scoot is off the board. So who knows? Maybe there are teams that like one of the, and by the way, I don't know who Portland would go for if they decide to keep the pick, because they've brought in Scoot for a workout like a week ago.
And how did that go?
As far as I know, it went well. They don't let us actually watch the workouts, but we do media sessions. I was really impressed with Scoot just from the media session that we did. And I mean, I've heard great things about him from like his time at the G League, as far as like professionalism and character and all that stuff. Like, I was really impressed. I think whatever team ends up with him is going to be very happy with him, personality wise, and also, from what I've seen on the court. But they brought him in. They brought both of the twins in from Overtime Elite, Amanda Nassar Thompson. They haven't brought Brandon Miller in yet. I think that's going to happen this week. They might be bringing in one or two more of the lottery guy, like Cam Whitmore, something like that. They're going through the process, and I don't know. And I think part of it is they genuinely are wanting to get a look at these guys in case they decide to keep the pick. But I think they're also trying to put it out there to other teams like, hey, we're totally comfortable keeping the pick if we don't see an offer we like, so you better get your offers up. You know how this stuff always is with leverage. I was convinced a year ago that they were going to trade the number 7 pick, because they traded for Jeremy Grant with other picks and stuff the day before the draft. And I had, like I said earlier, they were talking like right up until they were on the clock at number 7 with Toronto about OG Anunoby. But I think the idea was that Toronto wanted like a lot of other stuff in addition. I mean, how like you see all the stuff about like how Masai values his guys, and I think his asking price was just so high that they were just like, we're not going to do this. We're going to take Shaedon Sharpe. And at the night of the draft, Dame, when they didn't trade the pick for some win now guy, Dame was like, I don't know about that. But Shaedon Sharpe won him over the course of the year, and now Dame is fully in on Shaedon. I don't think he would be thrilled if they decided to keep the pick and not, trade it for somebody. But I also don't think that it's as binary of a thing as if they trade the pick, Dame's gone. Like, I don't think anybody is operating at this point as though there's a real chance that he's not going to be in Portland this fall. But I think there are a few guys that Portland would view trading the 3rd pick as worth it for. I think Zion would be one of them. I think the guy that has been like linked the most, and I know would be Dame's first choice, is Mikal Bridges, but I've heard mixed things about, Brooklyn says he's absolutely not available. I don't know how much of that is posturing or how
Brooklyn
much of that
has given away a lot of players over the last few years that they at one point people thought couldn't be traded. Right,
I know, and I think as far as like value for the pick, short of like the Zion thing is the absolute like moonshot, home run swing, because he has been, every time he's been healthy, he's like a top 5 type of player in the league, even though it hasn't been that much. Like, that's how good he is when he is healthy. So that's the full upside swing. Bridges, to me, checks the most boxes of like, he's young enough that like you're not tying your whole thing to another guy in his 30s. So like once Dame ages out, you've still got him, at his age. He's under contract for 3 more years at a pretty good number. He and Dame are friends. So like that's the one that I think they would view as like the most, perfect nexus of like value, but also like a guy that they think does move the needle. But I think Zion would be like the bigger, like high risk, high reward play if that was I think that's kind of more the area that they're looking in with this pick. Like I don't think like Brandon Ingram, for example, or like Zach LaVine or OG Anunoby. I don't think those are the types of guys they're really interested in with the third pick.
The last guy I'll ask you about, because the other one that I've heard connections that Toronto might try to get back in the mix with Siakam, and try to get him involved in the third pick. Is Siakam the kind of player? I mean, another guy who's been an all-star, who has been the second best guy on a championship team, plays multiple positions, still relatively young, not a bad number. I mean, he's pretty attractive for that spot.
I mean, I think that's somebody they would look at. I don't know where. I mean, I think Bridges is far and away like number one on their board. I don't know how feasible that is. I think there are a few things with Siakam. One is it's kind of a weird fit with Jeremy Grant, who I believe they're going to re-sign. So that's a little bit of a weird fit, but talent wise and like player type wise, I think that would make some sense. I think the other issue with him would be that he's only got 1 year left on his deal, and then you got to pay him.
Right.
Whereas the thing with Zion, I know you talked about the contract as like a risk, but also like, if it works out, if he stays healthy, you got him under contract for 5 years with no options. So you don't have to worry about like you trade for this guy and then he's going to leave in 2 years. Like that's kind of the risk with some of these other guys. That's why Bridges, under contract for 3 more years, he's making something crazy low, like 20 million a year or something. Like he has a crazy, cheap contract. So I think that like, that's the type of thing, they want to, they're trying to thread this needle. I don't know what how realistic it is. They want to thread a needle they want to go all in on, getting guys that are on, Dame's timeline or are ready to, compete and, contend right now, but they don't want to completely just like have nothing left when Dame ages out in 3 years. They don't want to then be starting over from zero. And then you're like you're the Charlotte Hornets and you just like have no talent. Which is why I think Shaedon Sharpe is somebody that they have, from what I understand, is completely off the board as far as any kind of trade, possibilities. That's somebody that they're not looking to move at all. So they're trying to do the thing of like, we want to have guys that can play with Dame and, are at his level, but we also want to have a little bit of upside there, which is why I think the Zion thing would be a little more attractive to them than Ingram. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, ultimately, I think that's what the Pelicans, I think, are going to have to hope that folks can talk themselves into. Because I never viewed Zion Williamson as a long-term NBA player, not a guy who's going to get 17 years in the league. I thought,
he's
a comet. He's a comet.
His body type and the way he plays, like, it's not going to be
It's the same way with Wembanyama. I don't think he's the guy who's going to play 20 years in the league. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I've read all the stuff about Victor Wembanyama. And apparently, like, there is so much, like, Zion had, medical red flags and stuff going back to when he was at Duke. Like, that stuff it's not like
it's
that
all
stuff
been on the
like,
same side of his body, too.
Right, exactly. Wembanyama, from what I understand, there is like a whole team of people that have been like working around the clock since he was 12 on
it's like Rocky IV.
Right, all the biomechanics stuff. Like, I don't think any of the injury red flags that existed with Zion coming into the draft exists with Wembanyama. And now I understand the argument that like just a guy that tall and like that body type, like I understand why there are some reservations there. I don't think it's quite the same thing as Zion, because with Zion, like, you knew, because he had that, that injury, that was the knee injury that he had at Duke, like when his shoe exploded and he missed some time there. And then, as soon as he gets in the league, in Portland, they dealt with this with Greg Oden when they took him with the number 1 overall pick. And there were, from what I know, like a lot of like medical staffs. And I know Portland's medical staff, I think it was ultimately Paul Allen's call, the owner at the time, that Oden's like talent and upside was too much to pass on. But I know their medical staff was like, looked at Oden and was just like, whoa, let's like, we can't go anywhere.
Off. I remember it was the hip.
Well, he had
like his one leg was significantly shorter.
Yeah, he had it because he had a hip surgery when he was in like 6th grade, and that resulted in his one of his legs being shorter than the other, and that led to all this other stuff. I don't think any of that stuff exists with Wembanyama. Like I said, with Zion, it would certainly be a risk that they're taking. Because if it wasn't a risk, then New Orleans would be a title contender, and we wouldn't be talking about, do they want to trade him? Because he would be a top 5 player in the league and an MVP candidate and a guy that's making them, a favorite in the West every year. That hasn't happened because he hasn't been able to stay healthy. So I almost wonder if, if you can, get a third team involved and make the money work and do whatever else. I almost feel like that is the most like win-win scenario for both teams, where the Pelicans can wash their hands of just having to deal with the whole Zion. Like, is he going to be healthy? What are people saying behind the scenes about his work ethic? Like all that kind of stuff. And you get to kind of restart with, if they're going to take Scoot, a guy that people think would be the number one pick in most drafts. And then from Portland's end, you've got a guy who, you're betting, and this is a big bet, but you're betting on a guy, who, is going to be motivated in a change of scenery, and the issues that were issues in New Orleans aren't going to be issues in Portland. And you've seen him be like an MVP level player when he's been healthy. And so I almost feel like it would be a bet that both sides are making that, might just kind of, it would kind of line up. I think it would kind of, from both ends and like what both teams' goals are, I think that's the one that would kind of line up.
Yeah, honestly, the more we've talked about it, it aligns more with Portland for Zion. It makes more sense if Portland were going after Zion than it does if I'm Charlotte. Because I don't see Charlotte taking the Zion risk. It doesn't make.
Who knows what Charlotte wants?
I mean, Charlotte is weird, and we don't know what's going on there.
You have to remember two things. You have to remember that Zion is a Jordan Brand athlete, and as of now, Michael Jordan still owns the Hornets. You also have to remember that Mitch Kupchak drafted Brandon Ingram when he was the GM of the Lakers, so maybe that's somebody that he still likes. But again, I don't know who the Hornets are going to end up taking. I was at the lottery and I was at the combine in Chicago like a month ago, and all of the buzz, like literally from the moment Charlotte moved up to 2, was they're going to go Miller, they're going to go Miller, they're going to go Miller. And usually when the consensus is that strong about something like that, where it isn't like the guy that was the obvious number 1 or number 2 pick, I guess, because I think if any team besides Charlotte had moved up to 2, we wouldn't even be talking about like who's going to go 2. It would have been Wembanyama 1, Scoot 2. Charlotte, I think, is the only team that there's some doubt about. But remember what happened last year at the draft? Everybody thought that Jabari Smith was going to go number 1 until like an hour before the draft when it started coming out. I actually know Orlando likes Paolo, or like, so I'm operating under the assumption that like everything that's out there right now from all sides is just kind of smoke, or it's out there for misdirection. So maybe after all this, Charlotte just says, you know what? We like Scoot. We're just going to take Scoot and keep Scoot and not trade with anybody.
And then what happens?
and then that sets off a lot of other dominoes. And like maybe Portland just takes Brandon Miller at 3, or maybe Portland. I mean, again, I'm talking about, but
is it still open? Yeah.
I think that would make Portland feel a little bit better about moving the pick if you're not passing on Scoot. But also, if Portland decides to keep the pick, I talked about how that front office really likes upside. Maybe they think one of the twins has higher upside than Brandon Miller and they go there.
Mike, you have to remember, like Amin Thompson.
You have to remember Mike Schmitz who is the draft guy at ESPN for a long time. He's in the Blazers front office now as an assistant GM. From what I understand, he was a big driver in the decision to take Shaedon Sharpe last year, because he was one of the few guys that had actually been at all the AAU stuff and had actually seen him play when a lot of people in the draft process had never seen him play. And so he was telling them like, no, this guy's for real. Like, you gotta, maybe the Twins are like some, like his type of prospect. I don't know. Like it's a possibility. I don't know. Again, they haven't brought Brandon Miller in yet, so I don't know for sure who is valued where on their draft board. But this is all kind of stuff that's up in the air right now.
This should be a very exciting draft, and hopefully, there will be some news before then, and we have some clearer idea.
Yeah.
But Sean, if there is a chance, if something does go down, I hope we could talk again and break it down.
Yeah, this was fun. Let me know if you want to do this again. If they actually do, maybe in 2 weeks we'll talk. We'll come back on here and do the Zion Williamson for number 3, like post
recap. Yeah,
maybe we'll do that. I don't know, but good to talk to you, man.
Man, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to it if we do get to do it again, man.
First, I want to say thanks again to Sean Highkin of the Rose Garden Report for joining me. If the Pelicans and Blazers do make a move, I'm sure we'll have him back to discuss the after effects of such a move. I think we learned a few things today. Number one, no deal with either of these teams is imminent. It'll be probably on draft night once Charlotte is on the clock before we really hear about something getting done. Second, Portland is more interested in Zion Williamson than Brandon Ingram, which increases the likelihood of a third team needing to be involved in my opinion. And third of all, no matter what, the Pelicans front office understands it has to do something. And this will be the longest 9 days that Pelicans fans will have to endure in some time. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like, share, and don't forget to check out thebirdrights.com for all your Pelicans news and analysis. Until the next time, I'm David Grubb, and in the words of our host emeritus, Mr. Preston Ellis,